Welcome to tonight's public forum hosted by the Party for Socialism and Liberation on the ruling class war drive against the sovereign nation of Venezuela, its democratically elected government, and its Bolivarian revolutionary process. My name is Sarah, and I'll be chairing the forum this evening. Before we begin, please turn your cell phones off or put them on silent. There's a bathroom down the hall to the left, and snacks, help yourself. There's water in the kitchen. The PSL hosts a forum every second Thursday of the month here at the San Jose Peace and Justice Center to educate ourselves on the main political issues of the day and to gain a revolutionary orientation on them. Meetings and discussions are a small part of what we do, however. Radical change, the kind that we need, comes from struggle, from fighting back against oppression, and that's why our party's existence is dedicated to leading, organizing, and participating in many struggles on an ongoing basis. Revolution and socialism will only be accomplished through a sustained and militant fight. If you're interested in getting more involved with the PSL, you can speak to me or any of the other speakers here tonight afterwards. And there's a sign-up sheet over here if you want to get on the listserv to be notified about upcoming events and mobilizations. Last weekend, in the face of the cold and threat of rain, a little over 200 people converged at the Bolivar statue in United Nations Plaza in San Francisco, demanding hands-off Venezuela, no coup, no sanctions, no war. More than a dozen activists traveled from the South Bay to join their voices against the U.S. imperialist agenda in Venezuela and Latin America as well. Several PSL members also came up from Reno, which is pretty cool. It was a successful action with speakers from a variety of different organizations, including the Answer Coalition and PSL, the San Jose Peace and Justice Center, Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, the San Jose Green Party, FMLN of Northern California, Serve the People, Anak Bayan South Bay, Code Pink, Haiti Action Committee, All African People's Revolutionary Party, Democratic Socialist of America, Arab Resource and Organizing Center, and Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism, the San Francisco Labor Council, and more. These voices formed a strong and unified voice against the U.S. mainstream media demonization and war drive campaign. The rally was followed by a spirited march to the closing rally at Powell Market, which is a main transit hub in the city, where many tourists and passersby stopped to listen and also to take literature. And we'd like to thank everyone that participated and helped in that action, as well as made it up for that. While that action was a successful one, we do not know what the Trump administration will do in the coming months. We do know that the establishment Democrats are pretty much united with them on regime change, and that's why we're here today. It is essential that opponents of U.S. war and empire understand the facts about this engineered crisis in Venezuela and mobilize in solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution. Before we begin that program tonight, and speaking of war and empire, I would like to take a few minutes to talk about another important area of solidarity work. On March 30th, 1976, Palestinians held a demonstration against the ongoing confiscation of their lands inside the 1948 borders of Israel. 6 Palestinians were killed and many others were injured by the Israeli forces at that demonstration. Since then, Land Day has been observed by Palestinians on March 30th, and on March 30th, 2018, Land Day actions were called under the banner of the Great March of Return and would kick off the first of the Friday protests demanding that Palestinian refugees be allowed to return to their lands, which were seized in the ethnic cleansing that made way for the creation of the State of Israel. And on that day, in 2018, at least 15 Palestinians were murdered, and over 1,400 were injured by the occupation forces. The actions were set to continue for 6 weeks, culminating on May 15th, 2018, which was the 70th anniversary of El Nakba, or the catastrophe, which commemorates the dispossession of the Palestinian people. Last Friday, March 9th, marked the 50th consecutive weekly protest. Last Friday, the Israeli occupation forces killed 23-year-old unarmed Tamer Khaled Mustafa Arafat and injured 145 others, including 35 children, 3 journalists, and 3 paramedics. In the face of the most severe threats and dire conditions, the Palestinian people remain resilient and determined to return to their homeland and claim justice. On March 30th, 2019, we will show our solidarity with the people of Palestine and gather for a rally and march in San Francisco. If you'd like to join this action, please speak to one of the organizers after the meeting. We also have some flyers for it here at the table. So now to our program. In the last couple of months, the U.S. corporate media has been claiming a quote-unquote humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, calling President Maduro a dictator, and calling the opposition leader Juan Guaido the legitimate president. So what's really going on in Venezuela? What is at stake? And how does this affect people in Venezuela and in the U.S.? Our first speaker, Evelyn Martinez, will answer these questions and help us understand why it's important to fight the U.S. war drive in Venezuela. Please welcome Evelyn.
Good evening, thank you for coming. I'm just going to try to give you some context of what's happening historically, what's been happening, and how things are developing. Things are developing and changing every day, so I'm going to include as much as I can, and I'm sure there's other things happening that I'm not including in the talk, but we can also have a discussion about it. So, on January 23rd, Juan Guaido, a U.S.-trained operative, declared himself president of Venezuela at the urging of Vice President Mike Pence. Before Trump became president, he was overheard saying about Venezuela that, quote, "That's the country we should be going to war with, and they have all that oil and they're right on our back door," unquote. Although most Venezuelans have never heard of Guaido and no election occurred to elect him as president, the U.S., along with corporate media outlets, rushed to recognize Guaido as the new president. This recognition by the White House and mass media celebrated Venezuela's peaceful transition into a long-awaited democracy. Although Guaido has the backing of Trump, the CIA, and the Republican and Democratic Party leaderships alike, huge numbers of Venezuelans marched to reject this coup and defend their independence. People in the U.S. are being hit with an avalanche of propaganda about Venezuela and the government of President Maduro. This happens in the run-up to every U.S. war. The tactic is to psychologically prepare people to accept the coming aggression by connecting it to a noble cause.
I'm sorry.
The tactic is to psychologically prepare people to accept the coming aggression by connecting it to a noble cause. The information war always precedes the real war. Mass media is aiding the government in trying to enact regime change in Venezuela. The demonization is the precursor for war and is constant. It is led by Donald Trump, Mike Pence, John Bolton, and Marco Rubio, and then echoed by the supposed opposition like Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, CNN, and the New York Times. It is repeated so often that it has an impact even on progressive people who are against a new war. Corporate-owned media outlets have completely ignored these mobilizations of pro-Maduro Venezuelans. Thousands of Venezuelans have been marching in defense of their country against U.S. interference in support of the Bolivarian Revolution and their democratically elected president, Maduro. These, I had some images sorry, but if you go online, there's a lot, and to our website, Liberation News, there are many images, pictures taken of mass marches in support of the Bolivarian Revolution, in support of President Maduro. John Bolton, the Secretary of State, who has been very vocal about about how beneficial.
Stop. You said John Bolton is not the Secretary of State. It's Mike Pompeo, who you haven't mentioned.
Okay, well, John Bolton, who has been very vocal about
National Security Advisor.
National Security Advisor, who's been very beneficial, who has vocalized and how beneficial Venezuela's oil would be to U.S. corporations, saying it will make a big difference to the U.S. economically if we could have American oil companies really invest and produce the oil capabilities in Venezuela. In other words, it's all about oil profits and not about helping the Venezuelan people. Turning back the clock to Teddy Roosevelt and U.S. battleships blasting restless natives, Bolton told CNN on March 3rd, in this administration, we're not afraid to use the phrase Monroe Doctrine. Warhawk Bolton was referring to the colonial relic that was invoked to justify dozens of U.S. invasions of countries in the Americas. Instead of battleships, Bolton's former boss, Ronald Reagan, sent 2 aircraft carriers to assault a 135 square mile sized island of Grenada. The Monroe Doctrine is also a relic of slavery. It's named for the 5th U.S. President, Slave Master James Monroe, who crushed a revolt of enslaved Africans in 1800. At least 26 people, black people, were hanged. The Monroe Doctrine helped murder Haitian leaders and helped to steal their gold reserves. At Trump's direction, the Bank of England has done the same to over $1 billion of Venezuelan gold. It's important to note John Bolton's previous history in the U.S. government. Bolton was a primary cheerleader of the Iraq War. He wanted the U.S. to go to war with Cuba over WMDs that didn't exist. In March 2015, he advocated for a bomb now and figure out the details later approach to dealing with Iran. And in March 2011, he suggested to an Iowa crowd that the United States should try to assassinate Gaddafi. The then leader of Libya and suggested that Israel should unleash nuclear weapons against Iran. Immediately after Guaido's self-declaration of being the new president of Venezuela, he echoes Bolton's statements by declaring that he would reprivatize Venezuela's oil and sell it off to foreign investors as soon as he took power. Sorry, I need some water. A few weeks back, the State Department sent Elliot Abrams, handpicked by Trump, to lead a U.S. government delegation transporting humanitarian supplies from Florida to Colombia in military aircraft. Just to give you some context on Elliot Abrams, he was the point man for U.S. policy in Central America in the 1980s. There was no murder too heinous or atrocity too large that he would not rationalize in the name of anti-communism. Memos released after the war in Guatemala reveal that Abrams was unconditional in his support of the Guatemalan military led by General Montt, who killed thousands of indigenous peoples. He provided support to Salvadoran military battalions and death squads responsible for El Mozote massacre for over 900 Salvadoran civilians, including hundreds of infants and children. He also supported Salvadoran governments responsible for countless other massacres of tens of thousands. His illegal activity and lying to Congress eventually led to a felony conviction and subsequent pardon by George H.W. Bush. That being said, Venezuela is in the midst of a serious economic crisis, but laying the blame on Maduro ignores both the causes of the crisis and the government's response. The main reason for the economic problems is the historic collapse of the price of oil that began in 2014. For the last 100 years, Venezuela has depended on oil almost exclusively to fund its national budget and acquire foreign currency earnings. The Bolivarian Revolution has led to enormous social progress since Hugo Chavez's election in 1998, but it has not yet been able to overcome this legacy of foreign domination, a difficult task that few countries have been able to accomplish. The price of oil reached a peak of more than $105 per barrel in June 2014 and then fell dramatically to under $35 in February 2016. This has been greatly exacerbated by U.S. sanctions against the industry that has now turned into a full-blown blockade, which Bolton estimates will cost Venezuela about $30 million a day. At the urging of the US in late 2017, Belgian financial services firms froze 1.65 billion of Venezuelan public funds, including 450 million in cash, that the government was attempting to use to purchase food and medicine. In January, the Bank of England essentially plundered 1.2 billion worth of Venezuelan gold that the government had deposited with them, announcing that they would only allow the coup leader Guaido to access the assets. This is pure colonial looting. It is critical to continue challenging the mass media's depiction of the Venezuelan government. Some on the left and right believe that President Maduro is a dictator. But if he truly is, why has he allowed large demonstrations to take place on a regular basis, calling for his ousting, promoted by huge private media corporations? Would a dictatorship allow 11 opposition parties to take part in elections, as happened in the most recent vote the country held in the latest elections? Even the US-backed coup leader, Juan Guaido, who pronounced himself president, and every day calls for the military to mutiny and for a hostile foreign power to intervene, is free to travel around the capital city giving speeches, holding meetings as part of his campaign to overthrow the government. Some people on the right and left are stating that the economic crisis exists in Venezuela because of socialism. Yet the Bolivarian Revolution, and although the Venezuelan government have declared that their project is to build socialism and have had major strides in that direction, the vast majority of the economy is still in the hands of capitalists. The private sector controls 50% of the production and distribution of food, 80% of personal hygiene items, 70% of pharmaceutical items, and 80% of clothes and shoes. Venezuela exists in a global order dominated by hostile capitalist classes to whom it has to sell its exports, such as oil, and from whom it has to import goods as wide-ranging as food, technology, and spare parts. Even the state-owned and nationalized enterprises have to operate by the rules of those foreign corporations, banks, and creditors. All this creates a large toolkit for the forces of capitalism, not socialism, to sabotage, extort, and undermine Venezuela's economic development. The gains of the working class during the last 20 years of the Bolivarian project don't matter to the warmongers, the oil executives, and the media pundits who can't wait to return Venezuela to its pre-Chavez U.S. neocolonial days. Let's not forget that Venezuela has the largest amount of proven oil reserves in the world and oil revenues. Oil is the largest source of income for Venezuela, and 60% of that revenue is used for social programs to benefit the people. Average extreme poverty level in Latin America is 30%. It was 44% in Venezuela, and when Chavez first came to power, now that figure's down to 5%. The percentage of underweight children was cut in half by 2012. Today, 95.4% of Venezuelans eat 3 meals a day. Millions of homes have been built with the goal of guaranteeing all Venezuelans dignified housing, and the government's food distribution program has been expanded. Guaido has already expressed the intention to do away with housing benefits and food distribution when he takes power. The situation continues to evolve daily, and with it, so are the media lies to enable this coup to continue to its full conclusion. In a more recent and very widely publicized incident of aid coming from the border of Colombia, it was first reported that security forces on the order of President Maduro had torched a convoy of humanitarian aid as millions in his country were suffering from illness and hunger. Venezuela's opposition held up the images of the burning aid, and it was reproduced on dozens of corporate media news sites and television screens throughout Latin America as evidence of Maduro's cruelty. It took 3 weeks for the New York Times to correctly report that what really happened with the aid. It was found that Molotov cocktails thrown by anti-government protesters were the most likely to trigger further blaze, and not the Maduro government. It was really nothing more than a symbolic provocation aimed at discrediting Maduro in front of the international community to generate waves of destabilizing violence. On March 10th, an electricity blackout affected most of Venezuela for several days. Communications Minister Jorge Rodriguez told press that a cyber attack had taken place against the computer system of the Guri Dam, targeting 3 of the 5 generators and forcing the dam's turbines to stop. He added that Venezuela would present evidence of the attack to the United Nations Human Rights Commission and to other international bodies. There's a lot of work to be done in building loud and visible solidarity, undoing the toxic lies from the mainstream press, and to show the reality of an existing Venezuelan democracy under attack by imperialist and anti-democratic forces. If the US actually cared for the Venezuelan people, they would not sanction them. Venezuela is no one's backyard and should be treated as a sovereign country. The Venezuelan people must decide their struggle based on the material reality in front of them, not on whatever will please the utopian ideals of critics. For us here, in the belly of the racist imperialist beast, our job is to respect the path the Venezuelan working class people have chosen, the Bolivarian Revolution, against the biggest military in the world, which they are committed to defending. We must turn to our government to stop them from destroying yet another country, first through sanctions and mass media disinformation, and then through military action. On Saturday, March 16th, thousands of people will march in Washington, D.C. against the Trump administration's efforts to engineer a coup in Venezuela and a new devastating war. And we are here today, and we are going to be there in D.C. saying, U.S. hands off Venezuela, no to the coup, no to the sanctions, no to the intervention, and que viva Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution. We're going to show a couple videos. This videos, I think they were taken by Gloria. She has been in Venezuela. I believe she interviewed this professor and just to give you some background about what's going on. There's this video, and then there's it's about 1.5 minutes, and then there's another video following that's about 5 minutes long, and it's regarding the housing in Venezuela. So, there.
A pesar del bloqueo, a pesar de todas las adversidades, aquí seguimos construyendo viviendas, seguimos con la salud gratuita, seguimos con la educación gratuita, le entregamos a los niños y a las niñas su computadora, le garantizamos a los venezolanos y las venezolanas que estén en edad de estar pensionados la subvención, y hay un pueblo movilizado. Cuando ellos hablan, que es una vergüenza para ellos mismos, debe ser una vergüenza, que le van a entregar comida a 20.000 personas, nosotros decimos que la revolución bolivariana, por culpa del bloqueo y por culpa de toda la situación de bloqueo pues, de nuestras cuentas y la posibilidad de comprar alimentos, le entrega comida directamente a 6 millones de familias. Es una vergüenza para ellos decir que van a entregar 70 toneladas de comida, cuando la revolución bolivariana solo en la región occidental, en la región andina, entrega 12.000 toneladas de comida. Es solo el show televisivo, es el show de la prensa, porque no les importa nuestro pueblo. Ahora nosotros vamos a seguir adelante.
I guess I'm usually elected to make this announcement, but we're very fortunate in being able to use the San Jose Peace and Justice Center for these kinds of events, and we'll be doing so as was announced every month. But in order to be able to sustain the Peace and Justice Center, groups that use it, and we can use it for free, but we do ask for voluntary donations to help sustain the Peace and Justice Center and to help pay for the expenses of putting on the events. So what we do usually is split it 50-50 with the Peace and Justice Center. So we're going to pass around a can, and if you can make a donation, whatever you can afford, it'll be very much appreciated. Thank you.
How do you guys usually do this? Just pass it?
Yeah.
Just
Like,
pass
give
it
to you,
along.
or you pass it here? And then I'll sit here.
Let me know if you want me to start this one. This is about their tremendous housing program that created, I think around 2.5 million homes for 2.5 million families, or 2.5 million homes. I think it was 2.5 million homes. They'll probably say it on there.
Oh, gee, I thought there was an earthquake.
2.6 million homes are built.
Oh, my God. Let's try this.
We're here in a huge housing project of the Misión Vivienda, which was started by Hugo Chavez and continued now by President Maduro. There are thousands of apartment buildings here, modern, beautiful, accessible to the people. And here is a tribute to Hugo Chavez. This is a fruit of Chinese-Venezuelan cooperation of the civilian military union. In other words, the workers and the military helped build this magnificent city here of housing.
Yo soy cantautor venezolano. Gracias al gobierno revolucionario de Nicolas Maduro, que ha seguido el legado del comandante Chávez, tenemos nuestra vivienda. Prueba fehaciente de la unión cívico-militar.
¿Dónde vivían antes?
Antes viví en algunos lugares siempre alquilado, arrimado, y donde vivía antes era una organización que es muy violenta. La mayoría de la gente ahí es de derecha violenta, del Partido Voluntad Popular, etc. Y nosotros tuvimos que irnos de ahí huyendo porque ya estaba en peligro nuestra vida. Porque el fascismo es así. El fascismo no entiende de ideas, el fascismo entiende de violencia. Por eso nosotros le decimos al fascismo, a la derecha internacional y al imperialismo norteamericano, Trump, manos fuera de Venezuela.
Por fin tenemos estabilidad y nunca hubiésemos podido tener un apartamento tan bonito, en un lugar tan bonito como este, con esas características. Vivimos en un apartamento de 3 habitaciones, muy bonito. Nunca hubiésemos podido tenerlo si no hubiese sido por la gran misión de Vivienda Venezuela. Porque al precio que compramos aquí, jamás hubiésemos podido comprar un apartamento de esas características en el mercado que llaman capitalista, que es el mercado, las viviendas del mercado.
Esta infraestructura tiene aproximadamente 8 años que fue entregada a más de 400 familias que están aquí ubicadas en 6 torres. Sencillamente la Gran Misión Vivienda nace en noviembre del 2010 en La Pedrera, un sector de la parroquia Antímana donde llegó Chávez, que le solicitaba a la gente que bajen, que bajaran. Y ese día ordenó que naciera la Gran Misión Vivienda Venezuela para todo el territorio nacional. Gracias a esa misión se han construido en Venezuela hasta la presente fecha 2.600.000 viviendas.
Tuvimos alrededor de un mes, creo, más o menos, por ahí de lluvia, que eso era día y noche, y entonces, como realmente mi ranchito estaba en la orilla de la quebrada, fue comiendo, fue bajando, y cuando nosotros pagamos la chubana, y todo mi coroto y todo eso, pero le doy muchas gracias a mi presidente porque este apartamento me lo dieron con todo, equipado con todo, y eso yo lo agradezco.
Más del 73% del presupuesto de la nación es un presupuesto que está destinado al tema del aporte social. Nosotros lo vemos como una inversión social, no lo vemos como una dádiva al pueblo, no lo miramos como una obligación al gobierno, lo vemos como la inversión social que un gobierno de corte socialista, de corte progresista, puede llevar adelante en función de garantizar los mejores estadios de nuestra patria. Y es por eso que Chávez siempre lo decía: lo importante para nosotros en la construcción del socialismo bolivariano, en la construcción del socialismo del siglo XXI, es la felicidad de nuestro pueblo, como lo decía nuestro libertador Simón Bolívar.
Hace rato que está lloviendo pueblo en Venezuela, y hace rato largo que comenzó la siembra nueva. Hace rato que está lloviendo pueblo en Venezuela, y hace rato largo que comenzó la siembra nueva.
Okay, great. So again, we're going to have the next speaker, and then so any questions you had from the prior talk or the next one, we'll have the discussion at the end. Our next speaker is Ernesto. He is going to give us some updates on the situation on the ground in Venezuela, and talk about how we can fight back. Please welcome Ernesto.
I don't think.
So actually there is some overlap between Evelyn's talk and myself, so I'll try to adjust for that. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is the myth of the people versus dictator that is propagated in the media. So a popular propaganda tactic is to reduce an entire movement comprising of millions of people and an entire national infrastructure to a single individual. It is reducing the Jamahiriya movement in Syria to a single individual, Assad. And it is reducing the progressive secularist, the Jamahiriya movement in Libya to Gaddafi. It is reducing all the progressive secularist elements in Syria to a single individual, Assad. And in this case, it is reducing the vast Chavista movement, which stands for helping the working class, the poor, the black, indigenous, and LGBTQ people in Venezuela to a single person, Maduro. So this erasure of a movement makes it easier to sell imperialist regime change by wrapping it in a language of the people versus dictator, and creating a villain. By creating a villain, this narrative of the U.S. benevolent dictator is justified. So to break down this narrative, I want to talk about a little bit about the gains of the Bolivarian Revolution and the social support that it enjoys. This is a little off topic, but this is a mass rally in support of the Syrian President Assad at the time when the U.S. was threatening military aggression. There have been gains for women in the Bolivarian Revolution. Chavez once said, the pains of the world are larger for women and larger for women of the popular classes, of the poorer classes. A real revolutionary socialist must be truly feminist, because the liberation of the people is achieved through the liberation of women. Under Chavez, Venezuela created a women's ministry in the national government, tribunals dealing with violent crimes against women, and pensions for poor women, a riot of women's health services, and expanded maternity leave. Maria Leon, president of the National Institute of Women, emphasizes the importance of recent groundbreaking measures like Article 88, which recognizes that housework generates value as well. She said, our Constitution enhances the struggle against discrimination of human beings, and because of this, it includes mechanisms for the protection of all social groups. Article 88 is an example to be followed by all countries in their struggle to eradicate discrimination against women.
Do you think you can speak a little louder?
Yeah. So she's a transgender activist in Venezuela. In 2017, Maduro announced a new program aimed at guaranteeing jobs for young people called Chamba Juvenil. Nearly 200,000 young people have been enrolled in this program. Venezuelan youth, especially those historically excluded from higher education because of poverty, now enjoy free education and real opportunity, thanks to 45 new public universities and colleges that have been created in the past 20 years of the Bolivarian Revolution. I think we have already seen some of the work on housing. I wanted to show this video which talks a little bit more about the CLAP program, which stands for Comité Local de Abastecimiento y Producción, Local Committee for Supply and Production.
The sound is off.
I think the sound will be coming from here.
Okay.
Oh, if,
Okay.
just to make it easier.
Oh, that's better.
Oh, it's subtitled. Hiding food. This way they don't have to be looking for food or waiting in lines. CLAP distributes it to us. It brings the food to us. This organization is very important in each of our communities. CLAP has a structure. One of them is the every family.
La estructura como tal se encarga de supervisar la parte que va a distribución, que va hacia afuera a distribuirse. Y el manzanero es todo, es el que te lleva, el que te tiene la información, es el que te lleva el alimento casa a casa, es el que sabe quién tiene la necesidad. Cuando nos llegan los alimentos que distribuyen la parte perimetral, que es la que nos distribuye dentro de nuestros espacios, ese sí es completo porque nosotros vamos casa a casa y no se queda ninguna familia sin alimento. Va más allá, la parte de organizarse, ¿verdad? Va más allá de la entrega de una bolsa de comida. Gracias al clan, a la organización del clan, nos hemos dado cuenta que tenemos tanto número de discapacitados exactos que atendemos con pañales mensuales, con ayudas técnicas. Y ahorita tenemos un conjunto con lo que es la parte médica cubana, que hemos colocado en el plano a algunas jóvenes que aún no han tenido niños, pero están estudiando. Entonces, el plan va más allá de eso, pues de entregar una bolsa de comida. Estamos centrando acá lo que es hortaliza, ¿verdad? Actualmente tenemos 33 arqueros en total. Estamos aproximadamente entre 15 y 18 mujeres que estamos aquí realmente trabajando, puras mujeres. La lombriz californiana nosotros normalmente la estamos criando acá porque ella nos permite darnos un abono líquido totalmente natural. Queremos desprendernos de ese reactivo y queremos independizarnos más. ¿Qué mejor que una cuestión que sea natural? Normalmente los rubros que nosotros cosechamos acá, ¿verdad? Los llevamos aquí mismo a la comunidad. El mismo día que nosotros cosechamos, ese mismo día lo llevamos a nuestra población. Venimos rescatando una cultura que ya se había perdido. Lamentablemente, en la Cuarta República nos enseñaron a ser consumistas, a comprarlo todo. Y nosotros hemos tenido la oportunidad ahora, ¿verdad?, de que nosotros podamos trabajar la tierra, ¿verdad?, rescatar los sueños, vamos a decir, rescatar nuestra cultura de nuestros ancestros, ¿verdad? Garantiza los alimentos que son tan sagrados para nuestro pueblo. Eso nos ha permitido independizarnos un poco y desprendernos, ¿verdad?, de lo que es el capitalismo. Si funcionamos, si hacemos el trabajo, gracias a esas instituciones de la revolución que nos arriman, nos ayudan y hacemos el trabajo como tal. Sí hay que mejorar, yo creo que sí hay que mejorar dentro de cada una de las estructuras de los clans, que los clans no son nada más un comité local de abastecimiento, que se que seamos producción, que vamos a producir, que eso es lo que nos va a llevar a desligarnos de ese capitalismo que nos tiene metido en la cabeza y no nos ha dejado surgir, y eso es lo que piensa la gente, que tienen que traerme, pero entonces no producimos desde aquí. Y el llamado es a producir, el llamado es a que se sumen a producir, a que todos los clases de Venezuela se sumen a la producción, para que ayudemos a nuestro presidente a ayudar a la producción.
As we can see, it is not a question of the people versus the dictator. There is a great...
Things I love about scanning it is the creativity.
There's a vast amount of support for the revolution within Venezuela. This is another clip that I also want to... I'll skip in the interest of time, but you can find it on Liberation News.
I think we played that actually.
Oh, you already played that?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. And again, inside of the economic hardships, which predominantly affect poor people, these are again the people that are the most, who are the most supportive of the revolution, because they see the revolutionary process as one that has transformed Venezuela into a more egalitarian, democratic, and participatory society. I next want to talk about the character of the opposition. The media tends to, as part of the media war against the government targeted for regime change, the country's opposition is typically whitewashed. They are provided a platform by the corporate mainstream media. Their credibility is elevated at the international stage. When President Mike Pence talks about restoring democracy to the Venezuelan people, he's referring to the minority of upper, wealthier layers of the Venezuelan society who want to give a green light to the US corporations to exploit the labor and resources of the country, who want to roll back social programs and progressive gains of the Bolivarian Revolution, and who want to share, get a share of the pie. The reactionary opposition is not starving for democracy. They have been invited to collaborate and dialogue by the Socialist movement for decades to resolve problems, but they have refused, saying that this huge movement that commands the respect of Venezuelan workers and the poor should have no voice, and that should be silent and submit to the US corporate domination. The opposition affirms this whenever they purposefully burn food use and use financial mechanisms to manufacture scarcity for commodities and necessities in a cynical effort to diminish support for Maduro's government and to punish his support base. I want to show a brief clip from 2017 that shows some of what the opposition did at the time when there was a big crisis, food crisis in Venezuela. I want to provide a trigger warning for the next few slides. So the class character of the class character of the opposition is also affirmed when in their so-called guarimbas, right-wing thugs belonging to the opposition commit hate crimes, including the lynchings and other forms of torture against Afro-Venezuelans and supporters of the Chavista movement. Following Maduro's first election in 2013, right-wing forces initiated a series of riots called guarimba that claimed 43 lives. The majority of the 43 people killed were bystanders or others who were targeted by the rioters, including 9 members of the police and National Guard. They set up barricades and barbed wire to close off intersections of whole neighborhoods and commit horrific violence against those who stood in their way. The opposition revived these tactics in 2017 with renewed brutality and with their extreme white supremacy on full display. One of the victims was a young Afro-Venezuelan named Orlando Figuera, who was stabbed multiple times, then doused with gasoline and burned alive. Even though these are strong images, so like I said, I do want to provide a trigger warning for anyone who wants to skip this. So this is Orlando Figuera. He was doused in gasoline and he was burned alive. And he was pronounced dead 10 days later. And like him, there have been other cases. So I also want to talk about democracy in Venezuela, because again the media tends to characterize Venezuela as a dictatorship, and so I want to talk a bit about that. So Venezuela has had 24 elections since Chavez was first elected in 1998. International observer missions have long verified the electoral system that is free, fair, and one of the best in the world. In 2018, Venezuelan elections were watched and watched over and endorsed as free by over 150 international observers. Most Venezuelans have 3 times now in the last 6 years strongly endorsed Chavez and the Maduro and the Bolivarian Revolution, and its programs to narrow the gap, the rich-poor gap that afflicts the nation. Before the fateful day of January 22nd, fewer than 1 in 5 Venezuelans had heard of Juan Guaido, but after a single phone call from U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, Guaido proclaimed himself as President of Venezuela. Throughout the administration of U.S. Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, Chavez suffered numerous assassination attempts before succumbing to cancer in 2013. Maduro has survived 3 attempts on his life, including one drone attack that was highly visible. I also want to talk about the pressure by the U.S. To force the military to betray Maduro. This is we need to remember that is an elected, democratically elected president. So I just wanted to show some headlines of some of the tactics used by the U.S. So there, the U.S. offers sanctions relief to Venezuelan military who betray Maduro. And again, I always want to point out how the entire Chavista movement is boiled down to one person.
Mm.
Again, more attempts to urge the military to betray the revolution. Trump threatened the administration of Trump threatened to deport military families of Venezuelan military members in the U.S. The New York Times admitted that the so-called humanitarian aid was being used by the opposition as a chief political weapon. I also want to make a quick note about U.S. aid. But I'll make it at the end of the presentation. Marco Rubio called for widespread unrest in Venezuela in the name of encouraging regime change. So this is not exactly a democratic means to approach the leader of a democratically elected government. I think that Evelyn's story talked about
We knew him. We knew him for a long time. He's not new for us.
Here's something I wanted to share from the Cuban minister. The statement by Cuba is that the U.S. has no moral authority to talk about human rights in the U.S. So he points out that there is discrimination inside the U.S. There is poverty. There is disenfranchisement of voters. There's violations of human rights of migrants. There are cases of sexual abuse of minors in U.S. custody. So it's interesting that the U.S. sees itself as the moral authority on democracy and human rights.
Can we go in about more, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please go. Keep going.
Okay.
We have questions that come.
So as Evelyn mentioned, there was a significant drop in the price of oil in around 2016, and the Venezuelan economy is heavily dependent on oil exports, and this is one of the primary drivers behind the economic situation. In addition to this, there has been sanctions and an international blockade of Venezuela. There was a recent, I think Evelyn has talked about this, but the Bank of England, at the urging of the US, blocked $1.2 billion of Venezuela's. And I want to point it out again, how the media always uses Maduro. So it seems to a reader, at least, it might seem to a reader that this is Maduro's own personal account that was blocked. There was also another there was a freeze of 1.6 billion by Euroclear in 2017. The sanctions make it very difficult for Venezuela to get loans internationally. There was the recent seizure of PDVSA, that's the Venezuelan oil company, so the operations in the US. And I want to share a couple of quotes by John Bolton and
Steve Mnuchin.
Yes, who is the Treasury Secretary. So we know that the legitimate government of Venezuela is, and we know what the legitimate government of Venezuela is, and our mission is to make it a reality for the people, to make what the people of Venezuela want. So of course, John Bolton knows better than
Venezuelan people, yeah.
And another interesting quote is from
Mnuchin.
He said, "These are valuable assets that we're protecting for the benefit of the Venezuelans." After this, Venezuela has moved his headquarters to Moscow, so Venezuela does have the support of international allies like Russia and China. This is a very illustrative picture that I want to share.
Trojan horse.
Yeah, like a Trojan horse. Violence inside humanitarian aid.
So that is almost all of what I wanted to share. I just wanted to show some more headlines of some media bias. So this is from the Herald. This is supposed to be a neutral source. The headline is "Picking up momentum in Venezuela hinges on getting humanitarian aid in on Saturday." So this is, it seems like a cheerleading effort of the coup attempt. So the characterization of pro-government supporters is civilian gangs. So if one is on the opposition side, one is referred to as a civil society. And again, sometimes all of this leads people to equate the Bolivarian Revolution with Maduro, and with economic with poverty, right? So it is part of the media war on Venezuela. And there's one last bit that I wanted to show. This is again from Gloria. Please let me know if this has been already shown. This shows the overwhelming support against U.S. aggression by the Venezuelan people.
El gobierno bolivariano, que es el que nos ampara a todos, hombres, mujeres y niños, y extranjeros y venezolanos, no nada más los venezolanos. ¿Estamos claros en eso? Y que viva Maduro y viva nuestro presidente Nicolás Maduro. Le doy un cordial saludo al pueblo.
more urgent than ever for people in the United States and around the world to act in defense of Venezuela, in defense of Venezuela's right to sovereignty and peace.
Thank you, Ernesto. Thank you guys both for those presentations. We will open it up for questions. What I'll do is ask for whoever wants to make a comment or ask a question to raise your hand, and I will count off a number. Remember your number because I'm probably not going to. I'm also going to ask that everybody keep their comments to 2 minutes or less, so that everybody who has a chance to, who wants to speak, will have a chance to do so. Okay. Once we're done with that, if we have time, we'll go for our second round. Alright. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyone else for this round? Alright, that's good. Number 1.
Hi everyone, my name is Nassim. I'm with the Green Party of Santa Clara County. Thank you so much to the speakers. This is, I think to most people here, most of what you said isn't new, but it's, for me, I've learned a lot about how the Venezuelan people are reacting, and I really appreciate Gloria being there reporting back. It's really nice to see those smiling faces. I think we need their help, frankly. So, not vice versa. But I just wanted to let you know that there is a really good report. It's a deep dive on the economic warfare that the US and frankly Europe has waged against Venezuela on the Green Party of Santa Clara County website. The URL is Santa Clara County Greens, sccgreens.org. If you go there under blog, Jordi Zapolak, who is a physicist, actually local Green, has done a real deep dive on the issues that the economic warfare have brought up, and the 3 main things that have happened, and it's very, very typical of US coups. I'm originally from Iran. This is exactly how it was perpetrated. It's a book that our government follows, and they really revolve around 3 factors: planned shortages, induced inflation, and also the third concept is a arbitrary reassessment of a country's risk by financial organizations. The third idea is amazing. There is a ex-major in the Venezuelan army who lives in Texas. He was actually involved in the military parade assassination attempt on Maduro. He runs a website called The Dollar. This is how they induce this artificial risk, because they actually, lower the exchange rate value, and it's illegal in many countries. So if you get a chance to check that report out, sccgreens.org.
It's there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really important. 2?
2. Last week, we had 2 people at the Peace Crossroads at Stevens Creek and Winchester for the anti-intervention in Venezuela. It was Dave and I. So we're going to be doing it again this Saturday from 12:30 to 1:30 or so. Didn't rain at all last week, and it won't rain this week, I don't think.
Every Saturday, right, Pete?
Well, it's every Saturday, but right now it's concentrating a lot on Venezuela. So, hope to see you there.
Great. 3?
Everything what happened in Venezuela, it did happen in another country before in Operation Congress, I know from hands. But I need to ask you a question. If you know about the guarimberos who are living out the country, for example, in Chile, there are 300,000 of fucking fascist guerimberos, okay? And 200 that are already, there are citizens, Chilean citizens, so they're able to vote for the next election, okay? And not only that, they're doing a horrible, they're collecting money, they're doing a lot of sabotage in Chile, even again to the Chilean workers. And the last time they tried to take over the embassy of Venezuela, and they were stopped by the Chileans, so they taken turn to protect the Venezuela embassy because they knew they were taking over like they did in Colombia and in Ecuador. But it's a plan, so it's very, people need to know that it's a plan. It was working with the government in Latin America, especially in the south, like in Ecuador, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, where more of these guerimberos are moving there, okay? And because they want to destabilize the government, And in 2 years, they became citizen immediately, okay? 3 years, they call the Venezuelan citizenship, okay? So they can able to vote. They have all the guarantee. There was Obama and Michelle Bachelet, an agreement when they moved about 150 then under Michelle Bachelet government to provide all the help to the Venezuelan so they can, they start to working in there. And so in Ecuador. And it's very hard because in Latin America now we have so many fascist governments. So the only fascist government that we don't have in America del Sur is Venezuela and Bolivia. And we're talking about Venezuela, but we forget about Bolivia. Bolivia is next. If Venezuela fails, Bolivia is next. And we need to be alert of that. And we need to have more information. Everything what you show in there, we have it there in the social media because we share a lot of information from my people in Chile. So I'm very aware. I can live out of my country, but it has been always be close to my country. And but in Venezuela, what I'm worrying is, yes, the people, we have to accept them. People, they need food, they need medical supply. It's not the Venezuelan government fault. We know that. It's part of the blockade. We know that. But we need to be aware when they play with the hungry people, and sometimes they beg for whatever other president they come in. I know that. It happened in other countries. Okay? So somebody we need to work in all together to lift the blockade. That's the most important. If we want to save the Venezuelan revolution, lift the blockade. Every other shit it doesn't work on. Okay? This is because it's only we want to assure the Venezuelan people have food, because believe me, it's not enough food for everyone. I have my nephew who was in there for 3 months, so I know that from the first hand. And my nephew belongs to the Young Communist Party of Chile, so he cannot lie to me. Okay, he's a doctor. So I know what's going on. And also they did not invest too much money in get professional. Everything is coming from outside. And that is a mistake. They need to create a more professional, more doctor, more people in technology. They don't have that. Okay, they spend a lot of money and they have a good program for housing, for everything. But they need to create something else.
Thank you. Okay, so
Number 4, mine was already stated, that's okay.
Oh, okay. Well, is there anybody who hasn't had a chance to say anything who would like to ask a question or make a comment? I see you. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to comment about so the economic war against Venezuela. I mean, it's a lot of times we look at these things and you hear the media say that, well, these Venezuela is a poor country, Cuba is a very poor country, and what happens is that the capitalist markets deliberately drive down the value of currencies of any country that tries to resist capitalism. So, for example, the Venezuelan Bolivar Okay, that is the unit of currency. So when I was there about 12 years ago, the Bolivar was maybe
4.
Was it 4 to 1?
4 to 1.
4 to 1. And then it was driven down so much, and there was all this rampant inflation. I mean, it's a complex picture, but part of it is this economic war. And so the Venezuelan government had to create a new Bolivar, right? So that new Bolivar was like they had to make it a million of the old Bolivars became one of the new Bolivars, and then I think it was 1,000, and then another 1,000. They did it twice, and so this reflects, you know, the amount of inflation that has happened, and I want to mention that, you know, this coup, you know, what we're talking about here with Mike Pence talking to Juan Guaido, it happened before. It happened in 2002. I don't know how many remember Pedro Carmona. So Pedro Carmona was in the National Assembly, and he self-declared himself to be the president. And at that time, the military was split, and so some of the military, you know, backed Pedro Carmona. A million people surrounded the Palacio Miraflores, which is the presidential palace, and demanded Chavez come back, and the military relented. And so that is how it was people power that ended that coup.
Yeah, I remember that.
Great, okay, and then I saw your hand again.
Yeah, Mike Pompeo announced on TV today or tonight that Cuba is the leading imperialist power on the face of the earth.
Cuba.
I was kind of shocked to hear that. And also on CNN, I think it was CNN, the same network, showed for about 5 or 10 minutes the operation to use the drones to assassinate. Apparently they tried to assassinate Maduro 3 times, and this one operation with the drones didn't work. But they practiced for months in the mountains of Colombia, I think it was, and they assembled the drones there, and they practiced for months. And it was a really intense operation, and they disassembled the drones and reassembled them once they got the material across the border into Venezuela, and that's where they launched the operation. And the bombs failed. They all worked because they practiced it so much for months. So it was a really involved, super big operation. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
I just thank you both for the excellent discussion topics and talks and video footage. But I really wanted to highlight some of what was said about like unpacking kind of the claims in the media and understanding what that is, especially the deciphering what it is when the U.S. media calls someone a dictator. You know, you see the footage and all these people supporting what Maduro's government, which isn't just Maduro, but like the people are moving forward. But he's a dictator, so what? And they've tried to assassinate him at least 3 times that we know of. But what about Saudi Arabia, and who seems to have killed a journalist in another country and who beheads people as a form of punishment? I don't think the United States has ever tried to assassinate any of the Saudi Arabian monarchs. Why is that? And that's really what we're saying about the intentions of the United States government can be seen when you just kind of take a look at what do they really mean when they say dictator, who do they say it to, and what does that mean about what side we should be on. And that's why we're here today, to really we gotta be on the side of the Venezuelan people's sovereignty and independence and their own path free from the likes of Trump and Pompeo trying to demand that they bow to U.S. imperialism.
Thank you. Alright, I saw another hand that's been up once before. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Okay, we'll go you and then you. I am going to be a little bit more strict on the time limit at this point.
Okay, there just was a resolution in the Congress and the House of Representatives to stop military aid or military action in Venezuela. This is the thing where supposedly the president can intervene anywhere, but they wanted to come back to the Congress so that did, I believe that did pass in the House of Representatives to prevent military intervention.
Good.
Was that the bill by Ro-Khanna?
Yes, well, he was involved in that, was one of the sponsors, Ro-Khanna. But even he said something about the elections, which was nonsense. He understands the problem, but in some respects, but then he's believing this thing about the elections. What was the problem there was that the opposition boycotted the election, so that wasn't fraudulent, they just didn't vote.
Yeah, to put myself on the stack real quick, I mean, I think that that's an important point, but I also think that it's important to sort of see these politicians for what they are, and the fact is, like, you know, some are more progressive than others, of course. A lot of them kind of sing similar tunes, regardless of what it is, as far as policy goes, and then sort of use different rhetoric, depending on which party they belong to. But like, that's interesting because you do see sometimes you have people who are, it's like, yeah, I'm anti-interventionist, like, let's not like put troops in the ground, or let's only drone, or, you know, all of these different things that they say, like, we all want the same thing, right? We want this government gone. We want this democratically elected government gone, and we have a difference of opinion on how to accomplish that goal. And so, you know, I think the majority of the politicians probably know that the stuff that they spout about elections being fraudulent it has no basis in reality. But there's a certain narrative that they want to spin in order to get the government in power that's going to better serve their interests. So I do think with a lot of the comments from tonight and the stuff from the presenters, like, it comes back, and I'm really glad that you know, Libya and Iran and Saudi Arabia, Syria, like all of these different things in their roles were brought up. I think I'm past my 2 minute. I said I was going to be strict.
But no one's timing.
But no one's timing. So I passed my limit, so you had your hand up?
Yeah, and I just wanted to, I also appreciate the note that you made about personality, about becoming really cautious of that. This country in particular, it's a world of personality. It's this idol worship, you know, Obama's fantastic, Trump is horrible. This is the game that not just our duopolies playing, but corporate media is flying right into it. This is such, and I see that coming from a different culture, I see it as a uniquely American culture of, you know, wanting to raise someone up just to see them fall apart. And this is what's very different in our government and the way we as voters believe we're voting. We vote for a person because we don't have proportional representation or ranked choice voting, right? There's always an angel and a devil. So, you know, as third party members, that's the challenge we have, is trying to make people understand that everybody needs to get represented. The Tea Party people and socialist and communist and, you know, so that is really critical for me to start to phrase things in terms of what is this movement, what is the ideology, not who's the leader of it, because that leader is dispensable. It must be dispensable because the U.S. will assassinate them anyway on the left, right? So thank you. I appreciate that. And one quick reminder that in that report there was talk about how do we export these coups? How do we create fascism? US is the biggest, coup machine and fascist creation machine in the world. But the Maduro and students from Venezuela had been trained for this. In 2005 and 2007, groups of students were exported by CIA from Venezuela to Belgrade to be trained by Serbian revolutionaries who caused that mess. And the organization is called Canvas. They don't even hide it. It's CIA supported and funded. In that same report I mentioned, there's a link to an article about Canvas and about how these groups of students, I think there were 12 students or something, they were there trained and then they were sent back to their countries. So all the revolutions of color that we heard about are being produced, manufactured, and staged. All these coups are being staged by this group of trainers that the CIA supports, and they move around and train people, and they move them to Belgrade. They have a huge facility there, and it's a training facility for interventionist wars like US. It's a great article to read on that. Gives you the chronology.
I will be reading that when I get home. I saw another hand somewhere, but I forgot whose it was. Okay. Well, that's fine. Do speakers want to make any final?
I just wanted to say real quick, it's important to note that so far Maduro is still in power. The coup that the U.S. attempted, the government has not really worked, but that it's important that we still remain very vigilant because we know how this imperialist government works and how it wants to have regime change, and the way it goes about is first is disinformation, sanctions, blockades, and then eventually military action. So it's important that we continue to get into the streets and talk to people and to talk to our friends, talk to our family, because there is so much disinformation in the mainstream media, and we're just bombarded with it. And so it really is, it takes a lot to decipher. So it's important to look to independent media, and you can also check out our website and our articles, because we have people on the ground in Venezuela, and we have kept up with what's going on, and so follow us, follow our website, and talk to your friends and family about what's really happening, because it's just a lot to decipher, and it's important that we get the message out there that the U.S. needs to keep their hands off Venezuela and let them control their own country. The Venezuelans need to have control over what happens in their country, not the U.S.
Did you have anything to add, Ernesto?
Sure. Maybe I'll just I just want to echo some of the thought that the people that it's often portrayed in the media in the U.S. that the U.S. seems to have a authority to judge other countries, and sometimes that thought trickles down to people who think that they have a right to decide that they kind of know better than people in Venezuela what is best for them. And I think it's important to keep in mind that for us in the U.S., it's our role to oppose our government, but not to. But it's not to devolve to this kind of racist, condescending attitude of thinking that we know better than other people in other countries.
Thank you. It looks like we have one more, and then we'll wrap up.
Sorry. Thank you to the speakers. It's been really nice to be here for this. To add on to just general talking to people about U.S. foreign policy, I think a big thing to note is that most people don't understand the extent of the U.S. empire and how it functions. We don't a lot of us don't quite understand whose interests our government represents. Like, most of us understand that it's not ours, but when it comes to human rights and, defending people against, maybe they're not even dictators, but maybe their government is sort of like ours, maybe their government is depriving people of, like, food and housing, if we just send aid or, like, put a different government in, that'll somehow help. And I think it's important to be, I see a lot of people who are very compassionate, and they're just really, really misguided. It's hard for me personally to navigate seeing my loved ones, defend the U.S. in whatever capacity, and I think it's really important to stay grounded in meeting people where they're at. That's something that I struggle with personally, and I think it's good to learn from people about how we communicate things and how we, what rhetoric we use and what language is accessible.
That's a really good point. Thank you for that. Yeah, thanks to the speakers, thanks to everybody who came tonight, everybody who donated, everybody who made a comment. I did mean to pass this around during the comment section and spaced it out. If you are not on the listserv for the PSL and want to be notified when we have activities or actions here in San Jose, this is going to be up here at the table, so go ahead and sign up there. Come visit the literature table. The next PSL meeting in this space at the Justice Center, I totally destroyed this script, is April 7th, right here, at the Peace and Justice Center. So thanks to the Peace and Justice Center, and if you want to stick around for some more conversation, please do. Probably not for too long though. We went pretty late.
Thank you.